All right, so let's take a deep dive into the life and career of President Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the U.S.
Yeah.
We've got these two Associated Press articles here. They're both hot off the presses.
Oh, wow.
They're about his recent passing and, all the amazing things that he accomplished. And what I'm really curious about is how this one-term president became such a towering figure on the global stage. It's kind of like there are these two Jimmy Carters. There's President Carter, and then there's global icon Jimmy Carter.
It's really a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't see it very often,
All right.
A president whose reputation grows so much after they leave office.
Exactly.
But with Carter, like his post-presidency almost overshadows those 4 years in the White House. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, like reading through these articles, the first thing that kind of jumps out at me is just how unexpected his rise to the presidency was. Like, Jimmy Who was like a real headline.
Yeah.
We're talking about a peanut farmer from Georgia. Not exactly like, the typical path to the White House.
It's true. I mean, back in '76, he was a total outsider,
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is how he used that to his advantage, right?
Right.
America was still recovering from Watergate, and there was this like sense of just disillusionment with like politics as usual.
Yeah.
And Carter, with his kind of like down-home style and his talk about, honesty and morality, he really tapped into that, like the national mood perfectly.
Yeah, it's like the country was really craving that authenticity. And Carter, with his Peter Brigade, right? All his friends and family hitting the campaign trail, he really offered just that. Like no fancy consultants, no big media blitz,
Right.
just genuine grassroots connections. And it worked.
Yeah. He wins Iowa and then New Hampshire, and suddenly he's like a serious contender.
Yeah, he's a force to be reckoned with.
Right. And then there's also that religious angle, which I think is really interesting. So Carter was a born-again Christian, and, he spoke really openly about his faith. And even, his struggles with temptation.
Right.
And that was pretty unheard of, honestly, in American politics at the time.
Right. It's like he wasn't afraid to show that human side, his imperfections,
Yeah.
And it made him very relatable, someone that voters felt like they could trust.
Exactly. And this idea of trust, of being a man of the people, that carried over into his presidency.
Yeah.
Think about those images of him carrying his own luggage off of Air Force One.
Oh, yeah.
Wearing a cardigan while asking Americans to turn down their thermostats.
Oh, yeah.
He was deliberately trying to distance himself from that whole image of like the imperial president.
Yeah, like he was a citizen president.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about his presidency itself.
Okay.
Obviously, we know it was just one term, but he still managed to accomplish a lot,
He did.
The Camp David Accords, that immediately comes to mind.
Okay.
I mean, to bring Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat together, leaders of nations that had been at war for decades. That's huge.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a testament to Carter's skills as a diplomat. I mean, he understood that peace wasn't just about signing treaties. It was about really building relationships, fostering trust. He spent hours, literally hours, with Begin and Sadat.
Wow.
Just listening to their concerns, trying to find common ground. It was that personal touch, that willingness to go the extra mile that really made Camp David happen.
And then there's the Panama Canal Treaty, right?
Yeah.
Which was another controversial move at the time.
Yeah.
Carter decided to return control of the canal to Panama after, decades of U.S. control.
Yeah.
And it was seen by some as a sign of weakness, but Carter saw it as like a matter of justice.
Right.
And fairness.
He understood that, America's standing in the world wasn't just about military might. It was also about moral leadership. Giving back the Panama Canal was a way to demonstrate that commitment to fairness. Even if it meant, facing criticism at home, it was a bold move. And it certainly shaped how he was perceived on the world stage.
Yeah. But then, of course, there were setbacks. The Iran hostage crisis, for instance.
Yeah.
That cast a long shadow over his presidency. 52 Americans held captive for over a year. It was a constant reminder of the limits of American power.
Yeah, and it played right into the hands of his critics, who saw Carter as too idealistic, too naive maybe for like the complexities of global politics.
Yeah.
And the economy wasn't doing him any favors either. High inflation, rising unemployment.
Right.
And it all created this sense that things were spiraling out of control.
Yeah. And so by 1980, when he's running for re-election against Ronald Reagan, the country was ready for a change.
Yeah.
Reagan offered this message of optimism and strength, like a stark contrast to Carter's more sober and nuanced approach.
Yeah, and that's the paradox, isn't it? Carter, the man who brought peace to the Middle East, returned the Panama Canal, was seen as weak and ineffective. It just goes to show how much context matters and how public perception can be shaped by events, even if those events aren't entirely in a president's control.
Right. Yeah, so we've got this fascinating picture emerging here, by a peanut farmer who defies the odds,
Right.
becomes president, achieves some really significant things,
Yeah.
but also faces some major challenges and ultimately loses his bid for a second term. It's like the first act of a much larger story.
Yeah.
So what happens next? How does this one-term president become, a global icon?
Right.
I guess that's what we'll explore in part 2.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm excited to get into it.
Me too.
Yeah, it's almost like,
Yeah.
he traded the political stage for a global one.
Right.
And he didn't just, step onto it, he built it.
Right.
The Carter Center, which he and Rosalind founded in 1982, that became like, the
Yeah.
powerhouse.
Yeah, I was going through the articles, and the sheer scope of their work is just mind-boggling.
It's crazy.
Election monitoring in fledgling democracies, disease eradication
Yeah.
in developing countries. It's like
No.
they had a hand in every corner of the globe.
It's really remarkable. Over 80 countries tackling all these issues of peace, health, human rights. They've helped to resolve conflicts, reduce poverty, improve access to education, healthcare.
And it wasn't just about, signing agreements or writing checks. The articles are filled with anecdotes about Carter, like rolling up his sleeves,
Yeah,
literally getting his hands dirty, like
I love that.
building houses
Yeah.
with Habitat for Humanity, even in his 90s.
Think about that image for a second, right? A former president hammering nails alongside volunteers well into his golden years.
Yeah, it's incredible.
He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need the accolades.
Right.
It was about embodying that belief in service, which
Yeah.
was something, deeply rooted in his faith.
Yeah, it's like those qualities that maybe sometimes tripped him up in Washington,
Yeah.
His idealism, his stubborn conviction,
Right.
those became his greatest assets on the world stage.
Exactly.
Like he could take risks, go places other leaders wouldn't speak
Right.
truth to power, without
Yeah.
worrying about political consequences.
He goes to North Korea, Haiti, Bosnia, places where diplomacy was like a tightrope walk,
Yeah.
where tensions were so high. And he had some remarkable successes, helped avert a U.S. invasion of Haiti, negotiated ceasefires in Bosnia and Sudan, even secured the release of an American imprisoned in North Korea.
Wow.
It's really remarkable.
It's like he found his true calling,
Yeah.
his voice after leaving the White House.
Absolutely.
And the world took notice. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize,
Of course.
solidifying his reputation as a global humanitarian.
It was more than just an award, though. It was a validation of his whole approach, this unwavering commitment to peace and human rights. And it's interesting how it kind of shifted the perception of his presidency, right? Suddenly, those qualities that were seen as weaknesses, that focus on morality, that persistence with diplomacy, those were being reevaluated in a whole new light.
It's almost like we needed time. We needed distance from the political battles of his presidency
Yeah.
to truly appreciate the depth of his commitment to peace and justice.
I think that's right.
But, it wasn't all smooth sailing.
Of course not.
He was never one to shy away from controversy.
Absolutely. Carter ruffled feathers, both in the U.S. and abroad with his outspoken views. He criticized U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. He spoke out against the Iraq War. He wasn't afraid to call out what he saw as hypocrisy or injustice, even if it meant, going against the grain.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes his legacy so compelling.
Yeah.
He wasn't a saint. He wasn't perfect. But he was always guided by his principles.
Yeah.
By his conscience.
Yeah.
He showed us that leaving office doesn't mean leaving behind that responsibility to serve, to speak out for what you believe in.
Yeah. And he did it all with this incredible energy, this passion for making a difference.
Right.
I mean, it's inspiring, really. He really redefined what it means to be a former president.
Right.
Set a standard that, honestly, few have been able to match.
So, okay, we've seen how this one-term president transformed himself into this global icon.
Right.
But I'm still wrestling with this question. How much did that single term, those 4 years in the White House, shape everything that came after?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did those triumphs, did those failures, forge the path for that extraordinary life he lived after leaving office?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's almost like we need two separate lenses,
Yeah.
to view Jimmy Carter. One for the politician navigating, like, the messy world of Washington,
Yeah.
and another for, like, the humanitarian
Right.
who's driven by this, like, unwavering moral compass.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
The very qualities that maybe like hindered him as a politician, that stubborn idealism,
Right?
that refusal to compromise on his principles, those became like his greatest strengths
Yeah.
when he was free from the pressures of, elected office.
Yeah, the articles talk about this contrasting view of his legacy.
Yeah.
He's this president that's often criticized for his handling of the economy, for the Iran hostage crisis, but then he becomes this globally admired ex-president, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. It's like his post-presidency allows for a reframing, like a reevaluation of who he was and what he stood for.
I think that's a really insightful point. Outside of the political arena, people could see his integrity,
Yeah.
his genuine desire to make a difference much more clearly. He wasn't playing the political game anymore.
Right.
He was simply trying to live out his values on a global stage.
Right. And it resonated with people.
Right. It did.
It wasn't about left or right or Democrat or Republican. It was just about basic human decency,
Yeah.
working for peace and justice,
Right.
helping those in need.
And it's worth noting that historians are really starting to revisit Carter's presidency with fresh eyes. They're recognizing some of the long-term impacts of his policies, especially in areas like human rights and environmental protection, things that maybe weren't fully appreciated at the time.
It makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what if he had had a second term, right?
Right.
What if he'd had more time to implement his vision?
Yeah.
Would those seeds that he had planted have had a chance to, like, fully blossom?
Right.
Would we be talking about his presidency differently today?
It's a question that historians will continue to debate, I think.
Yeah.
But I think what's undeniable is that Jimmy Carter was a complex
Oh, yeah.
and multifaceted figure.
Yeah.
His life was a testament to the power of perseverance, of adapting to changing circumstances, of, using your platform for good, regardless of the title or position that you hold.
He was a president, yes.
Yeah.
But he was also so much more than that.
Right.
A farmer, a naval officer, a teacher, a writer, a builder, a humanitarian.
Yeah.
And above all, a man deeply committed to his faith
Yeah.
and his family.
He once said, "I was not interested in just building a museum or storing my White House records and memorabilia. I wanted a place where we could work."
Wow.
I think that sums up his legacy perfectly. He didn't want to just dwell on the past. He wanted to keep building, keep striving, keep making a difference.
And that's the challenge he leaves for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
To find our own ways to serve.
Right.
To use our own talents and resources to create, a more just and compassionate world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be on a grand scale.
No.
It can be in our communities, in our families, in our own hearts.
Well said.
So to our listeners, I leave you with this. What will your legacy be? What mark will you leave on the world?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the remarkable life of Jimmy Carter.
Until next time.